business, tourism, entertainment. Get ready. BRB Network TV.
Did you know that we're ranked number 1 with regard to film production all over the world, right here in Louisiana? I'm Brian Herzog, Executive Producer and CEO of Herzog Entertainment and Films. If you're interested in a lucrative career in the film industry here in Louisiana, you might want to check out the Baton Rouge Film Industry Meetup Group. Go to www.herzog.com, click on Jobs in the Film Industry. Signing up is free.
Real Talk HD with Brian Herzog.
Let me introduce the panelists. We have Ambassador James Joseph, who is retired Emeritus Professor at Duke, also former ambassador to of the United States to South Africa, worked closely with Nelson Mandela in terms of developing his leadership program. We have Dr. Richard McCline of the Fanning Institute of Leadership, University of Georgia. We have Dr. Hugh Perry, Chancellor's Professor Emeritus, Political Science Professor, Southern University. And we have Dr. Ralph Christie, Development Economist, Cornell University. I will turn the mic over now to Ambassador Joseph.
Good morning. Some of you were with us yesterday and some of you were not. On yesterday we had an opportunity to hear these three distinguished gentlemen, and I'm not going to ask them to repeat or summarize what they said yesterday. Rather, we have been given an assignment, and that is to talk about leadership and the new normal. When I asked the dean what he wanted us to think about when he says the new normal, he gave me this quote from General Honore, and that is the title of his book. I probably should be giving you the title of my new book that's coming out for equal time.
Yeah, I think so.
He said, a handful of things have created our latest new normal. Extreme population density, the incredibly fast transmission of information, the rise of terrorism, the interconnectedness of business, and the growth of the ranks of the poor. What I would like to do is to ask each of the members of the panel whether or not this is their list or is there something they would like to add as we think about the new normal. And which thing on this list or their list they are most concerned about, and what kind of leadership do we think we need in addressing whatever that concern is. I really want to make this a conversation with you. And so we will go around and each of us speak briefly for a few minutes. Let me just begin by saying, as I look at what is being called the new normal, I think about something I said yesterday. And the fact is that we live in a time of transition. Everything around us is changing. The new normal is that we must learn to live with a changing world. And I also said that we are being called to lead and live at a time in which we are living between two worlds, an old order that is dying but not yet dead, and a new order that is conceived but not yet born. And so everywhere you look, there is transition from an old order to a new order. Now, what concerns me most, really two things. One is leadership required for living in an interdependent world. The world is changing. The more interdependent we become, the more people are turning inward to smaller communities of meaning and memory. How do we live in that sort of world? It's integrating and it's fragmenting at the very same time. What it implies from my perspective for leadership is an understanding of the source of power. We are, as a nation, seemingly glued to the notion of hard power. And hard power is the use of military or economic might to gain influence. And that worked for a long time. Hard power was our first choice, it seems, in international affairs. The world is changing. The major actors in the world stage are no longer necessarily nation states. They are sub-state actors, and they are all throughout nation states. And military power is not going to gain us the influence that we seek. We can stop and say that these people don't like our values, when the truth is they don't like our policies. They don't like the way they have been treated by those policies. I like to use an example of what happened when the Brits were asked to leave one of their colonies. The Governor General was speaking as they were about to leave, and he said, "I don't understand why we've been asked to leave. When we came here, they had no roads, they had no schools, they had no hospitals. We built roads, we built hospitals, and we built schools. Why are we being asked to leave?" And someone on the sidelines listening said, "It's easy to understand. You have had the wrong look in your eyes." So all this good that they thought they were doing was creating alienation, because not what they were doing, but how they were doing it. And so we need to understand the way in which the world has changed and the way the world's looking at us. Now, I'm not going to say that soft power is the only answer. We now talk of smart power, which is understanding when to use hard power and when to use soft power. And until policymakers at all levels understand that, we have a problem. My second concern is the way in which our communities are changing. We talk about the community. We don't have single communities. Rarely do we have single communities anymore. We are a community of communities. The demographic trends have made us a community of communities. And so we need leaders who understand that diversity need not divide, that pluralism, rightly understood and rightly practiced, is a benefit and not a burden, and that the fear of difference is a fear of the future. So if we are going to train and select leaders for the future who understand the new normal on the international level and even on the community level, we need to think differently about what is the new normal. Now I'd like to turn to my right and ask Dr. McCline the same question I started with. What in the new normal as described by General Honore, or in your own estimation, most concerns you? And what kind of leadership do you think is necessary to deal with that concern?
Thank you, Ambassador. You remind me of a thought I had in the back of my head on the new normal. I grew up in a generation where black was minority. That was about it. And when we grew up, it was black and white. And in Louisiana, it was black and white for a long, long time in most of the country. The new normal now is that we are not recognized as the minority. The Hispanic population has gained on us and moved on. And in the political discourse, you don't hear anything about the black vote, but about the Hispanic vote. We don't hear anything about what's going on with black business because we are not, and there are 40 million of us somewhere around here. And yet we seem to disappear into the woodwork. The new normal is recognizing that we are no longer the minority of America. And that those of us who want to be in a leadership role had better find a way to have what I call a collaborative experience, that we ought to be seeking out other folk because somehow we got to find a way to become more part of the power structure that is emerging in the 21st century. I'm concerned, as a gentleman, my mother-in-law said it best, that she said she was 87. She said, I'm glad I'm leaving and not coming. She didn't have much left. I'm kind of on that side of the bar, but I'm very concerned about those who are coming behind me, that they're coming up in a generation where blackness is something that I'm not sure we are embracing. I'm not sure that people are recognizing the need. One of my good friends, a gentleman named Joe Weston, wrote a book called Confrontation, Respectful Confrontation. And he pointed out that we got to find a way to move from conflict, which is active fighting, to confrontation, which is engaging different ideas in the marketplace. Until we find a way to come into a comfortable confrontation where we can share ideas with people who don't look like us, people who don't necessarily think like us, we are going to be really lost in the 21st century. I think our new normal is looking across the street for collaboration. Those with those folks who don't necessarily look like us. That may be Asian, may be Hispanic, may be women, may be all types. And coming from the business environment, I'm concerned that the black business community is slipping backwards and not forward. I'm concerned that we are not the target of outreach. We're not the target of anything except absence. So the new normal for me is raising the awareness that this is a different demographic trend. I live in Georgia now. Georgia in 2025 will be like California. The demographic model is not going to stop. And we're talking about what does it mean to have a community that is multicultural rather than black and white? What does it mean to have many people at the table who look different than you and I? That's a different kind of normal. That's a different kind of way of thinking about how we may move into the 21st century. So I see the challenge is, how do we figure out a way to collaborate with another minority or other majority in a way that makes business go forward? I don't know if we've faced that barrier yet. I don't know if we thought about it enough. But you don't have to be too far into listening to the national radio to know nobody's seeking our vote. Nobody's seeking our alliance. They're looking at other folks. And we ought to be very concerned about that new normal.
Did you know that we're ranked number 1 with regard to film production all over the world, right here in Louisiana? I'm Brian Herzog, Executive Producer and CEO of Herzog Entertainment and Films. If you're interested in a lucrative career in the film industry here in Louisiana, you might want to check out the Baton Rouge Film Industry Meetup Group. Go to www.herzog.com, click on Jobs in the Film Industry. Signing up is free.
Business, tourism, entertainment. Get ready. BRB Network TV. Talk HD with Brian Herzog.
And we begin with Dr. Perry, and each of the panel members have been introduced, so I need not introduce them again. Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm concerned about inequality in American society, and I'm concerned about the role that African American politicians have tried to play to reorder American society in a way that's fairer to groups that have been previously marginalized. I talked yesterday about the role that Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson played as a case study in his steadfast and committed effort to rearrange society in Atlanta, to rearrange the distribution of resources in Atlanta, such that African Americans would earn a fairer share of those rewards.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christie.
Yes. When an ambassador asks a question that has been framed by a general, and they want a professor to respond, you know you're in trouble. But as I said to the left of this panel, I want to be clear to illustrate that there is a diversity of thought among black people in this country. I said to the extreme left, to the radical left.
With me.
I want to move down.
And I'm going to start by saying something that might sound a little strange to people in this room. When I hear the word new, and when I hear the word normal, I become suspicious. If I'm walking down the grocery aisle and I see the word new and improved, I don't know about that. And I would go further to say I don't think anyone in this room is normal. I don't subscribe to central tendencies. I enjoy being on the edge, as I said on this panel. So that said, I just want to put that out there because I think it's also important to understand that there's nothing really so new and normal almost about anything. You can go to any point in history and we found ourselves at the crossroads. And people have pronounced doom or gloom. And that has been somewhat of a way of framing the conversation. However, Ambassador, I will say what is new about the time that we live in these times, in these days, it's not that so much things are changed. I think things have always changed. I think change, indeed, is the constant. But what is new here is the rapidity of change. Mm-hmm. Things are changing at a pace a lot more faster than any other time on the planet. And it's not that it's the change, it's the rapidity of the change. Things are changing so fast, I think it outpaced our abilities to manage. It outpaced our abilities to lead. And I think more fundamentally, as an academic, it really outpaced our abilities to conceptualize. Because the second we have framed or conceptualized something, things have changed. So this rapidity of change is the thing that bothers me. And I want to respond quite directly to your question because General Andre here has given us a really important list of information and inequality and terrorism and interconnectedness. But I would add a couple more things to his list. I see nothing on the list about biotechnology, the evolving biology. And if you think that this is something that's dismissed, I want you to reconsider what's happening in plants and animals. What's happening in taking a gene from one animal or one plant and moving into another plant. I work at Cornell University, and this is around me every day. I sat around 300 of the top biologists in the world, and I'm in awe of what's happening in biotechnology. First. Second, institutional change. I don't see a lot on this list about institutions. The institutions that we are familiar with, United Nations and World Bank, Those are global institutions, and they all are changing. But also the rise of nonprofit or non-profit organizations or non-government organizations, the rise of this so-called third economy is changing the landscape because they're challenging the current institutions, they're challenging our universities, they're challenging the extension systems, they're challenging the way we do business, these new innovative institutions. And then finally, Ambassador, the environment, the green. I see nothing here about the environment. I see nothing here about climate change. And we know that large numbers of the chaos and destructions we find in the world today, be it the typhoons or the hurricanes, are really, I think that the root cause of this is the rising temperature of the planet. And so then the environmental threat, and that environmental threat, I think, speaks volumes to our communities because it is so that brown and black people are disproportionately settled around the coast. Go to almost any country. You go to Brazil, you go to the United States. You don't go to the heartland of America and find us, except that lady I saw on TV in Spokane, Washington, who thought that she was African American. But other than that, you go to the Californias, you go to New York, you go to New Orleans, you go to the Floridas, and when that climate change manifests itself, it manifests itself in our community. And so I see these three important additions, modest additions to the list, I would add, on biotechnology, institutions, and the environment.
Did you know that we're ranked number 1 with regard to film production all over the world, right here in Louisiana? I'm Brian Herzog, Executive Producer and CEO of Herzog Entertainment and Films. If you're interested in a lucrative career in the film industry here in Louisiana, you might want to check out the Baton Rouge Film Industry Meetup Group. Go to www.herzog.com, click on Jobs in the Film Industry. Signing up is free.
Business, tourism, entertainment. Get ready. BRB Network TV. Real Talk HD with Brian Herzog.
This is an opportunity for us to ask questions of each other or to open it immediately to the audience and let us engage in a conversation.
How do we deal with a society where there seems to be a serious deficit of people begin to get poor and poor? And we're talking about leadership in its best form and in a collective form because each of you dealt with it sort of in a segmented form. But if we think about if there's an intentional need to make the world balanced or to bring some equity, equality to the disenfranchised, as leaders, what should our role be and how do we deal with the interconnectivity, yet we know that we're getting poor, but we just know it now. It's more obvious. When I grew up, I was poor, but I didn't know it. But now, because I'm connected with the people who are wealthy, I really realize how poor I am.
I don't think food should be taxed in Louisiana or anywhere where people are poor. I think the property, through taxation, there are a number of other ways we can get at more enlightened policies to help poor people. I really think education now should become more of a public good. Too many people are going to universities now and coming out in debt.
Right.
Debt. The cost of an education is getting out of line, and I really think a bold public policy needs to address that question, because at the core of this, not only the redistribution, I really think it's about investing in people's human capital. And so having a strong public education and supporting people to go to college. Someone said that, perhaps, going to college in America should be a public good, should be free. Why not? So I would push it to that extreme, because we're not going to get out of this rapidity of change when people aspirations are going up and everything else, technology, capital, human capital, social capital, everything is moving toward the wealthy. I think we need to tilt that scale, and these are two very ways, taxation and human capital policy, that I would push for very aggressively.
I think another question is, how do you change the public will? I mean, we have addressed this as a moral issue. We've tried to say it's an economic issue. The truth is that inequality is corrosive. It is not just in the self-interest of the person who's poor to be able to have mobility. It is in the self-interest of those other people who keep them poor. And so we need to begin to address this not just as a moral issue, but as an issue of self-interest. And I mentioned yesterday a study called the Spirit Level, which looked at comparative data on inequality in nation states around the world. And that was precisely that family, that more equal societies work better than less equal societies. So we need a new language, a new narrative about inequality and why it is in the self-interest of all of us rather than just in the self-interest of those who are suffering from inequality.
I think the overall comment I have kind of goes with both, and it's what he was saying. I think the overall is accountability. When you're looking at bringing two different classes and different economic situations and different economic situations among people, it's accountability. So you were saying before, how do we get people students that go to college and then they go off to come back and in their community and work in their community. In their smaller communities, it's harder and harder to do that every day because we don't go back to our smaller communities. We go on to bigger and broader things. But I think part of that and getting funding and money into education is making those, how many people or districts or areas keep track of the people that leave, that go on to bigger and better things. It's just like the universities, we do alumni. How do we look for our people that have left and become the doctors and the engineers and send them information and letting them know what is going on in the community they left, and they can give to these nonprofit, these organizations to help better students. Education is the biggest thing. Do we let them know the school that you went to, where is it now? What is it doing? How is it ranked? How can we help? We have our representatives, our senators. Do they work with their districts, the school system? Do they really, each and every one, do and make them accountable? The biggest thing is education. Poverty and education go hand in hand. If they don't have, we have these paths for our students, but they're not prepared. So are these school districts, are these schools being accountable? We have these leaders in these school districts, but are they holding each department accountable for their failing rates? It's the norm. Like you said, it's the norm. Everybody does the norm, but the norm does not work because we're increasing at different levels. So accountability is the key in all different areas of education of our kids and education of our communities and education of the people that leave our communities to know what is going on.
There is a number that African Americans have a 1.1 trillion spending power. So how do we change the trajectory of our African American thought process in how we spend our money and to use it and regenerate it back in our communities?
Good question.
Well, I have a thought that I would like to add to that. If you look at this table here with this panel, we're in a generation that is leaving the marketplace. I don't mean that in a good way. At some point we pass it.
Doesn't seem that way to me.
But I'm watching who's not in the room more than who's in the room. And the demographics of a marketplace are being dominated, will eventually be dominated by the millennials. Like it or not, it's going to happen. And I'm concerned that their voice is not at the table today. I'm concerned that when we talk about the new normal, it is not the baby boomers. We had our time. We had 30 years of prosperity. The millennials who are right behind us are the new normal. We cannot expect them to think, in fact, they don't think like us. They don't see race the way we see it. They don't see affirmative action. That's a word they don't even think about. If you look at all the polls on what's going on, they're talking about different kinds of issues. Their interest in interracial marriage is nothing like what we thought when we were growing up. They don't have that. So if the new normal is a different kind of normal, it really is. It is not the normal that the baby boomers have put on the world. It's a different place. And so I think we're a little probably remiss in thinking we have a hand on it, because the hand is still behind us.
Did you know that we're ranked number 1 with regard to film production all over the world, right here in Louisiana? I'm Brian Herzog, Executive Producer and CEO of Herzog Entertainment and Films. If you're interested in a lucrative career in the film industry here in Louisiana, you might want to check out the Baton Rouge Film Industry Meetup Group. Go to www.herzog.com, click on Jobs in the Film Industry. Signing up is free.
Business, tourism, entertainment. Get ready. BRB Network TV. It's Real Talk HD with Brian Herzog.
When I work in financial services, one of the things I'm going to say about the question that was just posed is that we as a race have not understood what is wealth. Having income is not wealth. So to really have us to understand how we build wealth is one educational process. The other thing is, based upon how we can get this disparity of financial shift in society, we live in a capitalistic democracy. And because that is the type of democracy we live in, there is going to be, as long as we have this type of democracy, disparity. But how can we close the gap on this disparity? It's going to probably, I would think, it would come through more education of understanding how democracy literally works. And if we don't understand democracy and how it works, then we don't understand how we can get into those different areas to cause the shift in economics.
Well put. Thank you.
So I keep hearing that you're talking about this new normal, but when I think about it from an economic standpoint, blacks only own 2% of the wealth in the country now, with the same percentage in 1910. That has not changed. We've even had our wealthy citizens become even more wealthier after this recession. So from an economic standpoint, we still don't have any money. Nothing's new about the situation we're in. So my challenge to you is, and my question is it really new? mean, we don't have any money. I don't see us getting any more money. That's number one. And number two, I've been reading and have been told that we don't operate as a group as the Jews do, or as, let's say, the Mormons do, or as other groups. But Dr. McCline says I'm to reach across to the other groups and see what's going on there in order to make more money. But I don't see that pendulum changing. We're still at the 2%, so help me reconcile all of this in this new normal, as you call it.
Let me just say you are so absolutely right. But one can look at the way we elected a president the last time and the time before. African Americans could not elect a president. But it was only because African Americans were able to find allies who recognized that they needed change that we were able to get a president. Now, some of the members of that alliance were frustrated because the president did not make some of the changes that they would have liked to have seen. But it's not simply the need for a new executive. It's the need for allies throughout the legislative branch that sets the policy. And so we fulfill one objective, but we went to sleep on the second objective when so many of us stayed home instead of voting. And therefore, we got the redistricting and we got the Congress we have, and we got a lot of other things. Right. So that's an area in which we need allies, and we got allies, but we only achieve a part of the objective. And so the strategy now is, how do you get allies in the economic sector? And that's where I talk about trying to get people to understand it is their enlightened self-interest to do something about inequality, and that's a public will question. And you're right, my final point is, I agree with everything that's been said about what's normal about the new normal. In some cases, the new normal may need to be the old normal. And think about it in leadership. You know, there was a time when we looked for leaders who informed us, inspired us, elevated us, empowered us, appealed to our better nature. That's the kind of leaders we look for. What we have now are people who want leaders who look like them, act like them, think like them. I kind of like to go to back to the old normal. Yes.
I too believe that leadership can make the difference, as my friend said there, and I think that you also said that it will take leadership, a type of leadership that can bridge the divide and bring people together, and that's on all levels, right. Community, et cetera, and et cetera. Well, my question to you is, and a new language. I heard Ambassador talk about that new language. I need to see how I want to frame this. We're in this room, and this is my second year, and it's just powerful information. But my question is, how can we, as you see it, take this conversation to a broader audience of leaders who are directly impacting that audience that Mr. Christy is talking about, and move people from apathy to action? Where there is no leadership, then all we have is the complacency and maybe the downtroddenness that you see. There is such a lack of leadership, and I'm wondering if the leadership was somehow brought into this conversation and even brought in with the understanding that they may not understand concepts, words, all of the above, but need what you have here. How do you see moving this conference to the average person who are foot runners and foot soldiers?
We build community out of crisis. We build community by accident, but we don't know how to build community by design. And we respond as a community when there's a crisis. It brings us together against all of those things that divide us. But we need, as you're suggesting, to begin to develop strategies about getting people to understand their self-interest when there isn't a crisis. You know, I was one of the organizers and a leader of the civil rights movement in Tuscaloosa, Alabama in the 1960s. The crisis was there. It was all in our face. And people were motivated to respond. The crisis is no longer as much in our face as it is in our bank account and in our joblessness in the community, et cetera. But people don't see that as directly as they did the crisis that had to do with survival, with life. And so I think what we need to do, and this is a good start, is for universities, for instance, to take the leadership in trying to bring the community together where they share the intellectual capital of sociological economic theory with the experience of the people who are actually suffering these circumstances. And so one way of doing it is trying to put knowledge at the service of the community rather than simply knowledge at the service of our students. And so I see this as an attempt to put knowledge at the service of society, and I congratulate the Dean and the College of Business for trying to do that. Now, are there other suggestions that people would make from that?
I'd like to address Reverend Moss's excellent question. And as I appreciated, Reverend Moss, you asked a two-part question. One is how we generate the masses, how we energize the masses to be more concerned, to be more actively involved in public policy, to pursue change. And the other part of your question is that how do we have dialogue with public officials to get them to understand the need to pursue certain kinds of public policies that would result in a fairer society? Both of those are formidable challenges. I suspect it's probably easier to get that first challenge done than the second one. I've attempted to establish dialogue with public officials throughout my career, and unfortunately, they have low regard for academics. And so unless you have a high established group, an elite group inviting them to participate in conferences, they're not going to respond to invitations to dialogue and conversation about how you create a different society. And unfortunately, those groups that establish those kinds of forums are not going to deal with the kinds of issues that we talk about here. So it's going to be a difficult challenge, but I think you have to make the effort. And like the Ambassador said, I congratulate Dean Andrews and the College of Business toward making that effort. But I'd like to see more public officials here. And Dean, in the future, I'm sure you did, but you should invite more of them so we can have this opportunity for dialogue.
Did you know that we're ranked #1 with regard to film production all over the world, right here in Louisiana? I'm Brian Herzog, Executive Producer and CEO of Herzog Entertainment and Films. If you're interested in a lucrative career in the film industry here in Louisiana, you might want to check out the Baton Rouge Film Industry Meetup Group. Go to www.herzog.com, click on Jobs in the Film Industry. Signing up is free.
Business, tourism, entertainment. Get ready. BRB Network TV. It's Real Talk HD with Brian Herzog.
Professor, you spoke about communities being built out of crisis rather than strategy. So how important is emotional intelligence in a leadership role in building communities going forward?
When Daniel Goleman wrote the book on emotional intelligence, he had in mind self-awareness, empathy, etc. And he found in the leaders he studied, the 200 or so leaders he studied, that they were most successful because of emotional intelligence. And so, talking about the new narrative, we shift the narrative from servant leadership and Robert Greenwood to Goleman and emotional intelligence. I like to suggest and built a leadership program, and several people here yesterday mentioned that they were graduates of that program, that was based on three other things. Not just emotional intelligence, but social intelligence, moral intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. And I think that those are the four qualities that we really need to cultivate in leaders. And it's not just all about emotional intelligence. That's fine. That's maybe a starting point. But unless you have the kind of moral intelligence that enable you to understand the difference between ethics in our individual existence and ethics in our aggregate existence. You know, our focus is on the microethics, but not enough on the macro. And so those are the kinds of things that I would add, but I would not dismiss emotional intelligence.